He always had a dream that one day he would go to America. And when he was from Austria, from a poor family, but he loved the beautiful things of life, and he decided he was going to have it all one day. So he did get to America, first in England for 2 years. The England was so he could learn English. He didn't want to come as a greenhorn. And then he arrived in England about 1901. He was born in 81, so he's about 20 years old. And in 1902, he arrived in New York and went to work right away. And his dream then was to go to the Pacific coast, because New York was too much like Europe. It had so many Europeans and different languages, and he was sure that there was a better place in America that he really wanted to make his home. And so he came to San Francisco. It's interesting that in those days, there were 3 cities in America that were important. It was outside of Washington. It was New York, Chicago, and San Francisco. And San Francisco, of course, was the most beautiful, and he fell in love with it. He met her in Vienna, and it was love at first sight. They had found out that they were born in the same town in Austria. And she had moved then when she was 8 years old. She'd moved to Vienna with her family. And when he met her, he said, "I don't want to marry you now." That was in 1905, in 1902 or something. And because he said, "I want us to have a good life from the beginning. I want to give you everything you want." So she said, "How long?" And he said, "Give me 3 years." After 3 years, she wrote to him. It was 1908. And he said, "I'm sorry, but I haven't made the $1 million I promised you." She said, "That's okay. Come pick me up in Vienna. We'll get married, and we'll make the $1 million together." And actually, she did make the $1 million together, because she invented the tea bag. Very interesting. The first stop was New York. It was they got married the 22nd of September, 1908, and then came to America in October, and my mother got very sick. She had the flu. I imagine she had the flu. They didn't know it in those days what it was called. And she wanted to go back. She said, "There's something wrong with me in this country. It doesn't agree with me. I want to go back to Vienna." And Papa said, "You know, you haven't seen this country. This is a very large country. She said, "Take me the furthest away from New York that you can do." So they went to San Francisco, and she was the happiest person. The rest of her life she lived in San Francisco. And after my father died, she still lived happily and had a wonderful big family. And I'm the oldest. It was Ernest and Edgar, Evelyn and Edgar, yeah. Papa was he knew everybody in San Francisco, because he was in the restaurant business, and he was a maitre d' in all the big hotels. He'd go from one to the other. He'd get a job whenever he wanted. Everybody loved him. One interesting thing is, when he worked at the St. Francis Hotel, which was the best hotel in San Francisco at the time, he wanted to take the night shift because he had so many things he loved to do during the day. He was an artist. He was a painter. He wrote poetry in German and English. But the nicest thing was, when he worked at night, there would be special people in San Francisco. There were musicians, there were artists of every kind, and a lot of them came from Europe. Of course, they all spoke German. They always said, "Let this German man, Joseph, come up and wait on me tonight and bring me my dinner. I don't want to go down the dining room." And Papa would go up, and he has heard some of the very interesting musicians of the early 1900s that stayed at the St. Francis, and they would say, "Listen to this, I just wrote a song, see if you like this." My brother Ernest was going to college, and he had a very dear friend, Irving Sugarman, And I never knew until much later that this Mr. Sugarman, the father of the young man Irving, was once a partner with my husband. They met, and it was just like meeting a brother. They were so happy. And then the next day, I was working for my father then. I didn't go to college because instead, I was now 23 years old. I was a secretary, bookkeeper, whatever, stenographer. And so I'm working, and all of a sudden I hear the door open, and I look around, see who it is in the office, and there's a man that's got his mouth open, and he's staring at me. And that was my future husband, Joe Greenberg. He was in love at first sight, and he took me out, and we soon got engaged. We got married in 1935, the same year that we met. And he was a perfect husband, a good father, a good man. Had a wonderful life with him. My husband had been a businessman since he was a boy. He was already working in the finest haberdashery in San Francisco, Parsons, when he was about 15 or 16 years old. They were very poor, his family. His father had come from Russia and had not done well in America at all. The only person, I think, who never did well in America was my husband's father. I never met him. He's supposed to have been a wonderful man, but I never met him. Papa Joe's father was a baker in this town of Odessa, and let's see, he would go, he worked for a woman who owned the bakery, and of course she had her eyes on this nice young kid, and she got him to marry her, and he was very unhappy. In the meantime, he had met a very sweet young girl in the marketplace called Esther, and he decided he's going to marry her, although he's married already. To make this long story short, he never divorced this first wife, and he ran off to America with this little Esther. But Esther would only go if the mother could come along, so she was the old bobby that came along with Louis. Louis was his name. It's become kind of a family name. Everybody loved Louis. He was afraid this woman would run after him, this wife that he ran away from. So he changed his name, I think, when he came to the United States, when he brought... No, I don't know why I picked Greenberg, except they always used to name after a friend that they knew. And after all, he was like he ran away from, that's not a very good thing to do. So he tried to change everything about himself. He never was a workaholic, as they say, because no matter how hard he worked, and he worked very hard, he and his brother, there were the three younger brothers that were very successful. Ike was next, the three youngest children. There was Joe was the oldest, and then there was one son that went back to Russia. He ran away too. And then there was Ike and Dan. But they worked very hard, but they enjoyed life. They worked from 8 to 6, 5 days a week, but the rest of the time they enjoyed life. They belonged to country clubs. They went to parties. Every Saturday night there were big parties. In those days there was a lot of entertaining, a lot of good times. People got together and had fun. Now it's not fun anymore to have fun. So many terrible things have happened. But at the beginning of the century, people could really enjoy America. There were no problems here like have developed with many other peoples coming that are not good people like there were in the beginning of America. They came for good reasons, and maybe now they don't come for such good reasons. Anyways, they did very well. They were in many businesses, but the best one they were in was called Standard Brands Paint Company. Knew nothing about the paint business, but the one thing they knew, that if they got the right people to work for them, they would be successful. They knew that they knew nothing, and that's so important in business. If you think you're a big shot and you know everything, and when you really don't, you never make it. But they always made it, and they were very happy people. There's one thing about the boys, they never wanted to involve anybody that wasn't part of the business. But if you were part of the business, you were told everything. For instance, every day, 5 days a week at lunch, they had a meeting. They'd had a wonderful cook who cooked a marvelous lunch. And they had a 2-hour lunch where many things were discussed about the business. People came up with new ideas and they talked about it. Maybe next week they'll do the same, but talk about it again. But they knew that if they were in charge, if it was good, they went on with it. If the idea was not good, they quit it. They were not afraid to quit something that didn't turn out well. They were very good businessmen. Mostly what they did, they always wanted to be sure that they had the best people working for them. And if they didn't have somebody that was really important in the business and wanted the business to prosper, they would buy them off or say, look, we'll give you a month's salary, 3 months' salary, whatever, but we want to have somebody else with other, it never hurt their feelings the way they did it. They knew how to do it. In other words, they were congenial, always enjoying their work. There was never any work they did that they didn't enjoy. If they didn't enjoy it, if they didn't, and the best thing was that they knew merchandise, because their very first work was in salvage. They would take all over the country, they'd go to people that were going out of business, and you had to sell the merchandise, and they knew every kind of merchandise imaginable. Very unusual, these three brothers, unusual and smart. He and his brothers did a tremendous lot in getting the state of Israel started, because they gave money to people. They bought boats in Mexico for people to get to Israel, because they could go, it was very hard to get through the lines through the Palestinians and the Arabs and all this business, but he got them in. They knew how. All it needed was money, and they had the money to give them, get people to Israel. No, that was the 30s. What was it? Yeah, 30s. My best memory was in 1923. I was 11 years old, and my mother got a letter from her father that he was very ill and he wanted us to come to, by the way, I have that picture. It's a beautiful picture of my grandfather on my mother's side. So we went to Europe, to Austria, and we spent the summer in the country. Kaltenleutgeben was the name of the country, but beautiful in the Austrian Alps, gorgeous. And I remember us, and I'll never forget, because the grandmother was so unhappy because we didn't like the food in Austria. It wasn't like, although it was so different, but it was different. And the worst thing was that they lived on this farm where they took in guests, and we children wouldn't drink the milk. First of all, it was so different because it had skim on it. They didn't pasteurize milk like we did here. Even then, we pasteurized milk. So she'd take us, each of us, into the cellar in these great big barrels where they had the milk, because milk in 1935 or 23, I mean, it was right after World War I. It was such a delicacy. Children didn't have milk then, especially in Europe. So the boys had always run away, the two boys and my sister. But when I went there, she'd say, Edith, they're not drinking. Please, will you drink milk? She'd speak in German because we all understood German. So I would drink that milk with the skim on it, and it almost killed me, but I couldn't hurt her feelings, the poor old grandmother. So we had a marvelous time, because wherever we went, of course, we were. But one thing was very funny. Whenever we took the train everywhere, wherever we took the train, we would see boys running after us and called us, "You damned Americans." Of course, we were the ones that, of course, won the war against the Germans and the Austrians. And most of my family lived in Germany, Austria, our family, and Poland. Part of Poland, it was Austria. You know, Austria was once almost the complete part of Europe for 150 years, up until the First World War. It was a very beautiful little town. It was very German, but it also had a Polish side. Over the river was the poor people lived on the Polish side.
The name?
Bielitz, B-I-E-L-I-T-Z, or in Polish they called it Bielsko. They changed the name from German to Polish later when Poland took over the city, but that was much later. 11, 21, 31. 1931, I went by myself to Europe. And there I met all these wonderful people who, I was a princess. I was treated just so beautifully because Mother had they had a lot of friends and relatives in Berlin, in Vienna, in Warsaw. And I went like a queen. I mean, I was taken everywhere. Wherever I went, my cousins would go with me, and I really knew so much about Western Europe, not France at all, but all the German-speaking countries. And I think that was 10 times better than any college education, to have met people from Europe and the way they lived and how they thought and what their world was like. Not a perfect world like America, a rather imperfect world, but yet they had a lot of fun and did the best they could without money, without any money. They were very poor. As I say, my mother came from a better, well-to-do family, and my father's family that's why Papa left for America, because he felt that there was so much to see and so much to do, and he had great ambition, not money-wise. He never thought about making money, but and the tea bag, I think we missed that one. Why, when they had their 4th child, my youngest brother was to be born, Mama said to him, "You can't work as a maitre d' anymore in the hotels. I'm not going to raise these 4 children by myself. I want you to get a job somewhere." So Papa said, "What kind of a job? What can I do? I only know the restaurant business, how to run a restaurant. I don't know if they could cook too. He was a marvelous cook." But anyway, so that's how she said, "You know, I thought of something." She said, she took a handkerchief and she put a spoonful of tea in it, and then she made a pouch. She was a wonderful seamstress. She curled up the edges and then put a top to it. Those were handmade tea bags for 6 months that she did with the immigrant families around her. The women would come to the house and sew. And later there were sewing machines from Singer's sewing machine, and in 6 months Papa had a big factory going. And he was the first one who made tea bags. And that was from 1917 to 1939 when he retired. My father was 59 years old, and it would mean that he would have to buy bigger, better machines, which were already offered to him in Germany, new sewing machines. He said, "I've worked hard all my life. I want to enjoy the rest of my life," which he did. 2 people that made it was my Aunt Erna, who now lives in Beverly Hills. She's been there since 1939. She came over. She was the very last. She and her husband, who was also a relative, came over in 1939, and they were the last ones. They were so lucky because the Federation, the Jewish Federation in Vienna, called. There were about 100 Jews left, and they had asked every day, if there are any visas, because Americans had given visas. When you give a visa, it means that you are going to care for these people when they come to America. America didn't want to have a lot of refugees coming in that would have to be helped by the government. So Papa had all these visas that he was giving, and these 2, and so they gave them to the last 2 of the family. And so they said, and already the quotas were filled. The German, Austrian, and Polish quotas were filled. You couldn't get any more of those 3 country people into this country. There were terrible laws before World War II, terrible laws. But so when they asked who wanted those last 2 visas, anyone not born in Germany, Austria, or Poland. And my uncle got up, I'm born in Czechoslovakia, so they got the visas. And my dear aunt, my uncle died many years ago, but my dear aunt still lives in Beverly Hills. She's almost 105, And she tells stories, and she's a wonderful person. Her mind is terrific, and everybody who comes to see her loves her. And so she was lucky. Now, she hates to talk about it, and she only said it once, but my 3 uncles, my handsome, handsome uncles, they lived right in the neighborhood, and she saw them being marched out of the city with the Nazis to the concentration camps where they died right away. But we were very close to all that.
Tell us about California. Tell us about Papa Joe and the boat.
The boat?
Yeah.
See, as I said, when my husband came from this family that they made money, but they enjoyed life. And one of the things they loved to do was go on a boat. And they bought a beautiful 32 Chris Craft. One weekend, my Uncle Dan, the brother Dan, would take it, and the next week, my husband Joe would take it, and they would go either to Catalina or down to San Diego or up to the San Clemente Islands. We would just take these weekends, and they loved boating. We also took many, many trips. We would drive down to Acapulco, to my whole life has been really one travel place after another. Guaymas, forgot the names of the little towns, all up the coast, down the coast through Mexico. And
well, you also visited my dad there, right, when he lived in Mexico.
Yeah. I remember a wonderful trip we took to Hawaii, and we dropped off Tony, Marco's father. We dropped off Tony, and we said, Tony, you enjoy yourself. We're going on to Japan and China. He wasn't interested to go to Japan and China. So what he did, he went surfing in Hawaii, and he was, I forgot the name of the guy. David, remind me the name of the fellow. Paskowitz. He brought surfing to the Pacific coast. Paskowitz was his friend, and they both came back, and they used to go down near San Diego there and surf. And we've had quite a surfing world in this Pacific coast because of Tony and his friend.
And you also traveled to visit Tony in Israel and went there, right?
Oh, yeah. I went to Israel many times, and we sent Tony. It was very interesting. The name of the Tel Aviv house, what was the name of the...
ZOA house.
What?
ZOA. The ZOA.
Yeah.
Zionist organization.
Yeah. And his friend Alco his father was going to start a ZOA house in Tel Aviv, so they were going to go there for a year, and Tony begged whether he could go too, and Joe said no, and I said yes, and of course I went out. So he was there for a year, and he opened Israel to us. Since then, we've loved our trips to Israel. Gary was there for months. So many of the family have been there for months. My nephew, my sister's son, Joel Harband, has lived there for many, many years with a large, large family. And we've been lucky. Whatever has happened, good things have happened. We've always been part of it. Joe loved my father and mother at first sight. And nothing could be better. He treated them like royalty. Whatever they wanted, he gave them, didn't even ask anything. He would give them all the time. Adored my father. There was no better relationship than my husband and my father, which makes for a very good marriage. They lived in San Francisco, and we were in Los Angeles. And whenever they came down to visit us, they'd go to parties with us, and it was a great, very good life. Joe was fantastic. He never let what other people did faze him at all. When he wanted to do something, he did it because he wanted to do it. On Sunday, the children went to Sunday school, but every Saturday, first of all, when we first got married, I had to ride horseback. I hated horseback riding. The horse never listened to me. If I had had any control, I would have been happy. Somehow, the horse never listened to me. But when Rosalie started, she was the first one. Boy, was she good on a horse. And every Saturday, they would go horseback riding and then have dinner at Dupar's at Farmers Market, which is still there after 100 years or more. I don't know how long. But each one child after another, as soon as they got to be 5 years old, they got on a horse. Joe always had his own horse, Ole. His name was Olympia, that was it. And he called him Ole. And he had it at Griffith Park. They had stables in those days. And he always kept his horse there. So he would drive down Sunset Boulevard to the Griffith Park, and on Saturday, that was the big day for the children to ride horseback. And I was happy to be home and relax without the children. All my life, I've been into music. I should have been a concert pianist, but I love too many things, so that was only one of my loves. And unless you love one thing, music, and nothing else, you cannot be a musician. So I just enjoyed it, went to concerts, and Joe was wonderful. He gave a big amount of money to the music center when it opened downtown, and I always had everything preferred. It was very lovely. And as I say, I never went to college, so when I was 62 years old, we moved to Bel Air, and a beautiful place that my son Tony built, a beautiful house, one of the first modern houses. And having nothing to do, all the children were gone and the grandchildren were all over the place, I went for 2 years to UCLA. Interesting, you know, I didn't have quite enough credits. I finished high school with a B average, but I needed to have a couple of A's, so I took the one that I knew I could get an A in was German, and I forgot, and music. I took those two to make up my college credit, which took 6 months, and I enjoyed those 2 years at UCLA. And that was in 62 or 3. And you know that that was the first time that adults went to college. Since then, you've got adults in college in every college in the world. But I was in the first class that started with adults. I'll never forget that, yeah. And UCLA was wonderful. It was very close to where I lived, and it was so much fun because we were a little group of people, and we were just wondering, what are we doing here? But isn't it wonderful to be here? All these young kids around us, you know, they don't know A from B, and we were so smart already, but we went to college and took the things that we always had wanted to take and never had a chance. So then what I did at that time, you see, German was still a very important language. Scientific books were all written in German. And I took 10 German subjects. I took Goethe, I took literature, I took poetry, I took history, everything in German, which gave me a whole new insight of the world, where the Germans had settled, things like that. And it was simply wonderful. My first language was German. I hardly spoke until I went to school. We lived in an immigrant part of San Francisco, which was on the very south side, just on the San Mateo line. And the people across the street were from Ireland. I'll never forget them. The screaming that went on there, and the dirt in that house. My mother would never go there. Very, very, very people that, I mean, they loved life. They didn't care about anything else, just having a good time. And then there were the Italians down the street, and then there were every other kind. My school and grammar school was made up of every ethnic group. Of course, they all spoke English. Not the parents; they had just come, but all the children spoke English. It was a wonderful. I have been so fortunate to have been born when I was born, because it was a world that unless they were born when I was born. I'm born in 1911. And that was a marvelous time for immigration to this country. It was the beginning, really. the beginning of something really steadfast. I adored my father, and he talked to me all the time, and he showed the world to me. But I was the only one that really listened. The other kids weren't, well, they weren't quite that old enough maybe, but my brother was a very sophisticated, he was just like his mother, very quiet and he could have been a prince the way he acted. And when he was 19 years old, he went to Canada. I think, I'm trying to think now, his father, they had gone on a visit. And he met his future wife, and he moved up there. And so we've had and then my other brother went up there, and he started 4 children there. So Canada, Western Canada has been part of our family world, part of our family.
Your sister was quite a character.
My sister married a very nice man, but she was not a happy person. I think the man she really wanted to marry married somebody else. You see, Berkeley was a wonderful, wonderful place in those years. It was really the one big, UCLA was coming up, but in the years between 1920 and 1940, I think that Berkeley was a much better college. It was a wonderful college. So my 2 brothers and my sister went to Berkeley. We lived in San Francisco, so it was just across the bay. And but she had 3 wonderful children. One went to Israel, one lives in Colorado, and one lives in Concord, right near San Francisco. I always said I wanted 4 children because my mother had 4 children. I thought that was a great family. I couldn't think of a better family. So my husband would have been satisfied with 2 children, but I said, honey, I want 4 children. So we had 4 children. And he was very happy. He was a very good family man, very good family man. I think my kids were all spoiled. They could have anything they wanted, and they took everything. They took everything they could. My daughter had a 10 years in Spain, which was an unbelievably unhappy time and an unbelievably happy time. Tony was a very happy child. But I think Tony was ambitious. When I think about Tony, I think that he was like a prince. The world was his. And I think when things didn't turn out so well for Tony, he became a marvelous architect. I mean, his architecture is still the most beautiful of any modern architecture I've ever known. But Tony was not, I think his world, he knew how great the world was and how great things could be done. And I don't think he was happy because he hadn't done everything that he wanted to do. And he really died too young. And Tony, mostly Tony. David was another very, what should I say, talented, crazy. David has always gone out into the world and done things that nobody else does. Got to do tree houses, which are quite unusual. Every type of tree house can be different, and he's been a part of so much of it. And of course, Gary is my scientist son. Gary is now doing science art with sand grains after many years of inventing microscopes, which are a wonderful world. But Gary always seems to want to be ahead of himself. He opens new worlds and then wonders why it isn't, boom, clapping and fine and perfect. Papa Joe, as my husband was called, asked every one of the children when they reached 18, when they finished the college, do you want to go into the business? And every one of them said no. And they said, I'm happy because I made my own way, and I think every child deserves to make their own way in whatever way they think. Whether it'll be successful or not doesn't make any difference. You want to be creative in your own way, and that was his answer, which was a wonderful way to look at it, because after the son, Sidney, of Dan, left the business, it fell completely apart because the people that were in it just pirated it. It was a shame, but that's okay because, yes, Standard Brands was the home runner of the discount business. It was do-it-yourself. He had a big room in front of each of the stores. He had 165 stores in the western states. And each store had a do-it-yourself where if you wanted to paint your house, you came there and you had a whole session about how to do it and discount. There were no discount stores. All of these discount stores, Walgreens and the names of them all, they all copied the idea of discount stores and do-it-yourself. You don't have to have anyone do it. If you like to paint, paint. Do it yourself. Papa, we never belonged to a temple except going for the high holidays. Papa was not, Papa and Mama were religious in the sense they lighted the Friday night candles, but we were not historically educated in Judaism. So when it happened that someone came to the door and asked if I was Jewish, and then, they used to have Jehovah's Witnesses, yeah, and she said, and then when I told her we're Jewish, she told me how terrible I was, how I killed Jesus and all this stuff like that. So then I realized that I was ignorant. I had nothing that I could have said to her that really would have given back what she told me. So that's when I started learning. I went to the University of Judaism. I took a 2-year course on everything about my religion, my country, my people, and that was a marvelous time. Now, when Papa Joe died in 82, that's right, 20 years ago, just 20 years ago, I realized that what I had missed in life was going to the synagogue on Saturday morning. And so people said, when I told my friends, they said, well, Edith, you have it so close. You live in Bel Air. Why don't you just go down the hill to Sinai Temple? Now, I had always been a Reformed Jew, and now I became a conservative, and it was the most wonderful thing I ever did. I believe I go to synagogue every Saturday morning, and it's a joy. One rabbi is more wonderful than the other, and it's part of my life, a real part of my life. I'm always optimistic. That's one of my good points. I've always thought well. I've always thought of a good thought rather than a bad thought. Sometimes I've been frightened if I think, well, what could happen to me now? I'm here and I'm alone and I'm this and that. But right away I say, Edith, what are you worrying about? You're lucky. Everything is always good. Forget about it. So I can always talk myself into that I'm a lucky person, and thank God I've had everything. I learned about countries, I learned about people, and I learned that people are the same everywhere. Whatever social strata you yourself come from, that's where you draw your friends, and that's what you give to others. Everybody lives in a certain social strata, and it's very interesting because it's yours, and you live it, and you enjoy it. Now, you can go up like Papa did, although Papa came from a very good family. They were good people, they were poor, but that has nothing to do with it. Money doesn't have to do with it. But the feeling of love for people and all the things that you bring along with you in your life, use it, and get better at it. Get a little bit higher if you can, but it's never money that's important, never. Sure, it's great that I had money to travel, and I was lucky at a certain point that I could enjoy life because I had the money, but it wasn't that necessary. A girl, it's harder for a girl. A man can do it with much less, but everyone should enjoy life. I think that's my hope for all my family, for all my children and grandchildren, all that they should enjoy life. That's it. What I want to say is that I'm one of the most favored people in the whole universe. Everything has been given to me. Good health, enough money, like Papa always said and Joe always said, we don't want to be rich, we want to just live well. And I feel that I've lived well. I've had a wonderful family. I've had wonderful friends. I've had the education that I needed. I have had everything that's good. I'm a favored person, favored over so many people who never got anything out of life. How can I say anything else? I want to cry now when I think about it, because I don't want to say I'm lucky. I don't want to say anything bad. I want to just say I've been favored. I've been favored. I've been happy. I've been excited. I've been thrilled. Everything that I've been given has been appreciated. My family, my children, my grandchildren, my little great-grandchildren, my little 6 great-grandchildren. Ah, what else can I say? And can we end on that? This is what it said about me. You will attain success in all affairs of the heart. Your children will be wayward and much excitement will come into your life. Doing their own thing, getting their own way, tasting of the cup of life, and going where their hearts lead them. You will magnetically affect others. You will have advanced ideas in all manners connected with the higher mind. Metaphysical subjects are of deep interest to you. You are fearless, enterprising, and courageous. The sea will have a special charm for you. Music will always have a strange effect on your inner nature.
And what year was this around? That this woman said this?
91, on my birthday.